They thought she was just a maid, so they poisoned the old woman in front of her. They never realized she was the only one watching, until what's that day they found a note. When the bus door slammed against me, one side of its outer bag ripped. I had to bend down to pick up the clean clothes that spilled out onto the floor. People passing by ignored me. A typical day, a typical city. No one noticed that at that moment, my life had taken a new turn. When I left the bus station, my phone vibrated in my pocket for hours. I didn't read the messages I was looking for. I knew Victor's messages. Where are you? Be home. You're running late. Prepare lunch. They were the same every day, but this time the message was different. Every time I read it, it makes me nauseous. Get her from Victoria and take her out. We'll be out of town until the weekend. Look after the old woman. What could have happened to Victoria? Victor's mother is 82 years old and suffers from age-related illnesses. For the first time, it was up to me to look after her alone for a weekend. We were only 5 years married, but these kinds of tasks had become frequent lately. I found Victoria at home. The room was a mess. The sheets underneath were filthy. I immediately called out to Victoria in a polite tone. There was no response. I went into the room and found her in bed, her eyes open but empty, her mouth slightly ajar, and her breathing labored. My heart started racing. I tried to take Victoria to the hospital. The moment I pulled out my phone, a weak but surprisingly strong hand grabbed my wrist. When I turned around, I saw that it wasn't the Victoria I knew. I looked into her eyes, sharp, focused, in control. "What is your name?" he asked in a clear and commanding tone. "Eleanor," I replied, trembling. "Eleanor," he said, hesitating to use the word. "That's a good name. Now listen with me. Don't take her to the hospital. Lock the door. Draw the curtain and listen to me." I obeyed reflexively. Victoria's voice was more authoritative and clear than anything I'd ever heard. This was unlike anything I knew about dementia patients. Dementia patients were supposed to have difficulty communicating. According to Victoria, it was all a game that had been played out for the past 3 years. Instead of taking Victoria to the hospital, I listened to her explain what she needed to do. There was an old box hidden under the floorboards. When I lifted one of the floorboards, what I found inside, a small porcelain box with gold embellishments, would change my life. What was inside? Victoria calmly explained: liquors, drugs, and a document. A promissory note, altered, and a title deed. Victor's mother, Victoria, wasn't just an old woman. She was the head of a holding company, one with money, power, and control. Dementia was just a charade. Senility, too. It was only after hearing her name again that I realized Victoria's real name was Viviana Margaret Worthington. Victor and his wife, Margaret, kept telling me for 3 years that the money I was paying, 80% of my salary, was going towards Victoria's upkeep. I foolishly believed them. In reality, the money was used for tuition, lavish meals, and Margaret's new clothes. Viviana, the woman I knew as Victoria, explained the cult and its plan to me. Victor and Margaret had planned to hasten his death by slowly rendering him incapacitated. Perhaps a fortunate accident, perhaps old age. No one would question it. And then the deed, the assets, the house, it would all be theirs. "Eleanor," Viviana said before leading me to a secret elevator, "do you know if there's a control room in your house?" I didn't know, but where Viviana pointed, the wall slid aside. I went inside. Screens, and more screens. Security cameras, audio recordings, files. Conversations between Victor and Margaret were played. They were discussing killing her. Clearly, Victor was sturdy and slippery, while Margaret was sharp and ruthless. "Eleanor will manage it this weekend without leaving a trace." My heart stopped beating. Viviana turned to me. Her face was stern, but her eyes were full of compassion. "Eleanor," she said, "they have included you in their plans. They want to frame you. If I die, you'll be the police's first suspect. Listen to this recording." Victor's voice recording played on the phone. "I feel like I've completely fooled Eleanor. The stupid woman doesn't even question the flow of money. She'll be our cook when we can't find her, a young woman drinking wine when we have money. The police will believe they want to find her in my bakery." There were even more recordings. Times when they argued with me, times when they mocked me, even times when they spat at me. Margaret belittled my most private moments. "Eleanor, she's so stupid, she can't even wash her own laundry properly." Tears started streaming down my face, but Viviana's voice trembled. She hugged me. My daughter, she said. My name is Viviana Margaret Worthington. Victor is my son, and I'm far smarter than you damn fools would believe. Margaret is his wife and a sex slave. But you have the real gold: compassion, work ethic, honesty. If you wish, we can punish them. What do you mean? I asked. That means starting the operation, said Viviana. Viviana's lawyer, Mr. Harrison Clark, arrived. It was perfectly normal. Witnessing a secret meant bearing legal responsibility. I signed a document that was more than just appointing her as a custodian. Viviana's assets and company were registered in my name. That night, the house was completely transformed. New furniture, new colors, new smells. Viviana stood up with her cane straighter, stronger, more beautiful. Her hair was styled, her makeup done. She was no longer suffering from dementia. She had a corporate manager. We were waiting for Victor and Margaret to return. Around 11 o'clock, the sound of a car was heard. When the door opened, a crystal chandelier lit up. The house now had the appearance of a palace. Viviana sat in her red velvet armchair, a mocking smile on her lips. Victor's face turned pale. Margaret's mouth dropped open. It meant the real game was about to begin. Mr. Clark appeared with the documents. Mr. Victor, he said in a calm tone, Miss Margaret, your mission has failed. As everything slowly begins to make sense, an indescribable weight washes over one's heart. Looking back, it becomes clear that many seemingly insignificant details are actually part of a chain. Behaviors that go unquestioned in the flow of daily life eventually lead to significant consequences. While people continue to trust in the established order, certain truths silently progress. This silence is often not conscious, but a blindness brought on by habit. As doubts arise, it becomes easier to suppress them, because confronting them means accepting not only the truth, but also the change it will bring. Therefore, some questions are postponed, some answers are left incomplete, but every truth postponed returns as a heavier burden later on. At this point, people begin to reconsider the decisions they made in the past. As the picture becomes clearer, trust is profoundly shaken. The weight of what has happened is not limited to material losses. Years invested, shared moments, and dreams built are also subject to scrutiny. This process is exhausting, but also instructive. And it is precisely at this stage that a person learns to redefine their own boundaries. Mr. Clark's voice was sharper and colder than the crystal chandelier echoing in the room. Victor and Margaret were completely frozen. I could see Margaret's hand trembling, panic, fear, the moment reality collapsed. Your mission failed, Mr. Clark repeated, opening his documents. And the crimes you committed against Eleanor have been documented by the state. Victor's jaw dropped. He turned to me, an incredible rage in his eyes. Eleanor, did you do this? Do you have that kind of energy? I smiled coldly. No, Victor, I just did the right thing. Viviana rose from her chair and stood upright. Every movement exuded authority. Victor, she said, her voice as hard as steel. Listen to me, because this is the last time I will speak to you. For 3 years, I have observed you. I have tested you. The result? You are utterly inadequate as my grandson. But worst of all, you are a murderer. Mom, Victor shouted. This is crazy. Eleanor has taken control of you. Did you see the test they did at the hospital? You have dementia. No, said Mr. Clark, his voice sharp. All the tests you've undergone in your life were lies signed by Eleanor. Viviana is completely in control, and that control is in Eleanor's hands. Furthermore, Eleanor signed these documents. He pulled out a file. She gave Eleanor the right of attorney for all of Viviana's assets. This is fully valid and binding in terms of gear and law. Margaret's face was like the look of someone waking from a dark nightmare. No, this isn't true. Viviana's money is ours. That money, I interjected, speaking not like a shipping assistant, but like an accounting manager, used that money 80% of my paycheck, $4,800 a month for 3 years. Do you know how much that is? $172,800, and it wasn't just money. Margaret, you bought 16 pairs of designer shoes. Victor, $8,000 was spent this year to feed 3 smoking habits. Victor's face flushed with anger. How did you get our personal information? Cameras, Mr. Clark said quietly. Everywhere. Every conversation, every action, every crime was recorded. And we didn't just record what happened here. We checked your company's accounts, Victor. You embezzled Viviana's company funds. The total amount? $89,000. Victor's legs gave way. Margaret clung to him, but she too was on the verge of collapse. Viviana slowly approached Victor. When she looked into her daughter's son's face, there was no mercy in his eyes. You, she said, are of my blood, but not of my values. Eleanor was a housemaid, and now you and Margaret are guilty. Eleanor didn't hand over these files, but I can. Or rather, I can't. I can tell Mr. Clark to do it. Please, Margaret began to plead. Please, Viviana, we just made a mistake regarding Malik's development. But who is this Malik? I asked. Margaret remained silent. Victor's eyes gestured. Malik, Viviana said, Victor's former partner. He's a man who got fired for stealing his job. And you, Margaret, plotted my death with him. A door opened and the sound of a policeman's voice was heard. A signal from Mr. Clark was enough. 3 police officers stepped forward. Victor and Margaret's eyes widened in horror. Victor Chin and Margaret Ellen Chin, said the police officer, I am arresting you on charges of attempted manslaughter, elderly neglect, and economic abuse. The handcuffs clicked. Victor tried to resist, but the police restrained him. Margaret began to sob. The flow of her tears seemed foolish, at least in my eyes. Please, Margaret cried. Eleanor, you didn't ask for this, did you? Please tell me. She looked at me, her eyes filled with need, forgiveness, and despair. But I just shook my head. No thought, no compassion, just coldness. No, I said, this is what I want. This is exactly what I want. They put them in police cars. Margaret screamed, pulling at her hair. Victor, meanwhile, was still fixated on the scene. He couldn't believe all the luxury of the house. Viviana's power, the coldness in my eyes. After the police left, the house fell silent. A different kind of silence, a peaceful silence. Viviana turned to me and put her arm around my shoulder. You did well, Eleanor, he said. You did very well. The next morning, the legal proceedings began. At Mr. Clark's office, a team of lawyers greeted me. As Viviana's representative, I signed everything: company management, real estate, bank accounts. Overnight, I went from a penniless housemaid to a very wealthy woman's representative. But money wasn't the main goal. The goal was justice. The files related to Victor and Margaret's house sale were examined by the prosecution. The recorded conversations were clear evidence of the crime. Their answers in court were of no use. Faced with the evidence presented, the jury reached only one conclusion: guilty. Victor received a 14-year prison sentence. Margaret, 12 years. Tears, pleas, apologies, it was all in vain. The law had been reversed. Prison customs. Victor was put in a cell with burly prisoners. From the first day, they started using him as a servant, washing designer clothes, cleaning shoes, dry cleaning. The very tasks he once told me, Eleanor, you can't do this, were now starting to break his own hands. Margaret's situation in the women's prison was far more painful. She was treated just as she once was, a piece of trash. She was made to work in the kitchen, do welding work. She broke down much faster than a housemaid. The dirt under her fingernails, the cracking of her skin, the hair loss, everything. Perhaps she could understand by experiencing the same things I had experienced. 6 months later, Viviana and I had completely changed our lives. We moved to a large estate with farms, companies, and bank accounts. Viviana began to live as Viviana. She was no longer suffering from dementia, no longer a laborer, and no longer an elderly woman living solely on her husband's pension. She was the president. Viviana Margaret Worthington was the director of the company, and I, Eleanor Catherine Hayes, is her assistant manager. I would go to her office every day, a real office with a glass door and a nice desk. I would attend meetings. I would make business decisions. As Viviana's advisor, I would give her advice and illustrate strategies. But the most beautiful moments were the evenings. We would sit in the garden on our farm and drink tea. Viviana would share complex thoughts with me. Eleanor, she would say, you are not the backbone of my success. You are the one who defied death. Now, defy life. 3 years later, Viviana's health began to improve with food. Doctors, who had already thought she would have a short life expectancy, said she could live for another 40 years. Dementia, it turned out completely that it was a misdiagnosis. Victor and Margaret had caused his cognitive problems by giving him medication. That was pulled from his pocket. I remember the moment. Viviana was sitting next to me and said, Eleanor, what if you hadn't come back that day? What would happen? I asked. I would have died, he said frankly. I would have definitely died. Maybe this week, maybe next month, but I would have died. They were planning my death. But I'm back, I said. Yes, said Viviana, taking her hand. God opened the way, or fate, or simply chance. I don't know, but I do know this. You are my angel. That means I deserve to be saved. A year later, Victor and Margaret were in prison, but the prison walls weren't kind to them. Victor suffered a heart attack in the middle of the prison. He miraculously survived, but was physically broken. Margaret, meanwhile, began to suffer from mental health issues. Suicide attempts, medication, therapy, nothing helped. But the most interesting part was their mutual accusations. Victor claimed Margaret had the idea for everything, while Margaret accused Victor of being in control. They were separated. Different wards, different prisons. What a revolution in my life. Viviana turned out to be a person beyond my wildest dreams. Thanks to her, the company quadrupled in value in 5 years. Our social responsibility projects began providing care for abandoned elderly people. Scholarship students received education. Eleanor's The Foundation has been officially established. Yes, it was founded in my name. A foundation that will bear my name. An airline that will change my life. Viviana gave me and Viviana's true friends rings. Inside the gold ring was inscribed, Eleanor, you are my daughter. His daughter. She wasn't Victor's uncle. She wasn't his wife. She was his daughter. That night, I cried in Viviana's arms. All the pain, heartbreak, and despair of my life came out, transformed into sobs. But these were healing tears. When the heart is closed for so long, it hurts to open. But the peace that follows is worth all the past pain. Viviana hugged me. You can be anything you want, Eleanor, she said. Professor, doctor, art director, anything you want. For me, go, study, grow. I went. I participated in the company's corporate training program, business administration, accounting, human resources. Within 3 years, I was no longer a housemaid. I was the company's assistant manager. In 5 years, the manager. In 8 years, CEO. President Viviana Margaret. Worthington remained as an advisor to the company, but I made the real decisions. Seems to flash before my eyes the messy room, the empty tin can, the old woman I knew as Victoria. I think about that day often. A spur-of-the-moment calculated decision. Listening instead of calling for help. Cooperating instead of calling the police. That's the secret of life. Sometimes the most desperate moment is the most powerful opportunity. Victor and Margaret were released from prison after 10 years. Both were pale, broken, and unrecognizable. They lived in a shelter on the outskirts of the city. No one recognized them. Jobless, penniless, hiding. Viviana sent me a message. Would you like to see it? No, I said. They're no longer a part of my life. Viviana nodded. She understood. But one day, walking down the street, I saw Victoria from my old life, my old world. She wasn't there anymore. Her life had just begun, but her eyes still carried the pain of the past. He looked at me and recognized me. There was sadness and, perhaps, gratitude in his eyes. Eleanor, she said in a soft voice. I stopped. I turned around and looked at him. No, I said quietly. There's nothing between us anymore. We have no connection. She hung up on him and walked away. That night, we sat in Viviana's garden. As the sun set, the sky turned orange and golden. Viviana looked at me and smiled. Do you regret it? He asked. No, I said. God chose me for the sake of justice. I did what he had to do. Viviana nodded. Yes, she said. You did well. The story doesn't end here. Here's the truth. Justice doesn't come like a flash of lightning. It's a process. Long, painful, but ultimately just. My journey to justice began in that room with that frail old woman. She emerged as Viviana Margaret Worthington, and I, Eleanor, Catherine Hayes, I became her protector. As time passes, it becomes clearer that certain truths are being concealed. Small inconsistencies in daily life, when combined, form a larger picture. Initially, people are reluctant to look at this picture because acceptance means understanding that things are not as they seem. This, in turn, means the fundamental undermining of a secure order. The lingering unease gradually gives way to a profound awareness. Events no longer seem coincidental. Every detail recalls a sign previously overlooked. This moment of realization is one of the most difficult turning points in a person's life because after that point, nothing can continue as before. 10 years passed. In my company office, sunlight streamed down my desk through the large windows. A famous magazine featured my photo. On its cover as the company's CEO, the headline read, "From humble head to CEO, the success story of Eleanor Hayes." The newspaper columnist tried to question my past. "How did a housemaid rise to such heights?" he asked curiously. I replied, "The right decisions, the right people, and luck." But the second part wasn't a lie. Viviana had turned out to be the right person to change my life. That day, she mentioned feeling a slight discomfort. There was no fear in her eyes, only curiosity. Viviana was 90 years old now, but she still looked strong and dignified. Her eyes were still sharp, her mind still clear, but her body had begun to bear the weight of time. The doctor said she had heart problems, mild but serious. She needed surgery. After hearing this, Viviana looked at me and smiled. "Don't worry," he said. "I've come this far. Overcoming a heart problem is a small thing." But this was no small matter. On the day of the surgery, I was waiting at the hospital. Viviana's two nurses, a doctor, 3 surgeons. Hours passed. Time seemed to stand still. My cell phone vibrated. Messages came in, but I just waited. The surgery was successful. Viviana recovered relatively quickly. Her eyes, her views, the work she did were powerful. 6 months later, she was back in her office signing documents. But now she had placed her complete trust in me. "Eleanor," he said one day, taking an old box from his dresser, "this is for you." Inside was a letter written in Viviana's own handwriting. When I opened it, tears welled up in my eyes. It read as follows: "My dearest Eleanor, if you are reading this, I am no longer here. Perhaps it was the things of civilization, perhaps a disease, perhaps simply time. But you are reading this because now is the time. The moment I first saw your eyes, I knew. I knew you weren't just an ordinary housemaid. I knew there was a leader within you. I knew there was a world builder in your heart. When I didn't love Victor, you saved me by standing by my side. You could have done so much more. You could have run away. No one would have questioned you. But you didn't stop. When you stopped, you were a special person. I give you the entire company, not just the documents, but all my thoughts about a better future for you. You can do this. I will know, in heaven or somewhere else, that you will do good. Remember, as you age, compassion should shape. The best way to do business is through compassion. I love you, my son. I love you more than Victor. Viviana Margaret Worthington." I read the letter and wept with a broken heart. After the letter was discarded, I checked her will. Everything was left entirely to me. 88% of the company, all of her real estate, bank accounts, investments. Viviana had even specified her last money to charities, educational programs, and nursing homes. Viviana's death was a tragedy not just for me, but for the company and the city. Thousands of people came to the funeral, business leaders, government officials, company employees. During the funeral procession, when the music played, I sat in the front row and cried a lot. Victor came to Viviana's funeral after being released from prison. Under police surveillance, of course. His eyes were empty, his face aged. He looked at me without any emotion. Then he turned his head away. Perhaps there was anger he needed to escape, perhaps simply despair. I didn't know if Margaret was coming. Her name wasn't on the list that was announced. After Viviana's will was reviewed, the company's empire passed entirely into my hands. But this was just the beginning, not the end. My first task was to find Victor. I found him on the street in an old raid house. His life after getting out of prison was like a quintessential example of a crumbling engineering business. Alone, penniless, with no future. I didn't want to knock on his door or even look him in the eye, but I did. "Victor," I said. He turned his raised head towards me. He recognized me and his eyes widened in horror. "Eleanor," "Be quiet," I said. "Just listen." Him about the Sterling Foundation's rehabilitation program for inmate workers, building confidence in finding work, training, treatment. There was no money, but there was work. There was no dignity, but there was hope. "Why?" Victor asked. "Why are you trying to help me with this?" "Because," I said, "Viviana helped me." Because that's how justice works. If someone supports you, you support someone else. Victor shook his head and began to cry. At a moment like this, it was easy for him to feel pity. But I had also learned the difference between compassion and pity. Compassion requires strength. He joined the foundation. The first month was very difficult. The other workers knew him. They'd seen him on TV, read about him in the newspapers. But over time, Victor slowly began to change. He confronted his own feelings, acknowledged his own wickedness, and tried to change. A year later, we heard about Victoria. She was working for a caregiver, a real caregiver, earning her own money. No betrayal, no escapades. Just a simple life, but she had found herself. His owner had said he was an extremely reliable and loving person. And with peace of mind, I thought I was getting better. 5 years later, the company was worth $2 billion. The Eleanor Hayes Foundation had provided education and rehabilitation services to over 500,000 people. Some, like former prisoners, had been given a second chance. Others, like vulnerable elderly people, had found dignity and care. When the company conducted an audit, they found peaceful employees. They knew this wasn't due to high wages, but to compassionate management. The employees weren't just workers, they were family members. I had changed. I became a woman who wore expensive dresses, expensive jewelry, and drove expensive cars. But none of it altered my behavior. I loved drinking tea. I loved reading books. I loved silence. I sat in Viviana's garden and remembered her. I closed my eyes and felt it. One day, the office received a letter. Inside was old handwriting. It was from Victor. Eleanor, I was a bad guy. Maybe I still am, but I'm trying to change. Working at your foundation, I learned that what we did to my mother and what we did to you. Facing reality brings a great emotional burden. While contemplating what one has lost, one also tries to rebuild the future. Feelings of loneliness can weigh heavily on one hand, but at the same time, the desire to regain control strengthens, and this strength allows one to redirect their own life. What we've done is irreversible, but I've accepted that. I now work as a nurse caring for someone who lives with me, an elderly woman, 85 years old. I clean her bathroom, cook her meals, and listen to her. And what I always remember is that what we did for my mother wasn't mean or empty. I was grateful for that because compassion is not just about governance, it's about transformation. Victor Chen, after finishing the letter, tears streamed down my eyes. The same thing had happened to Viviana. The person who once only saw compassion had finally begun to give compassion. I received news about Margaret 2 years later. They had found her as a social worker, someone from her own library who worked at the rehabilitation center. That same month, she was awarded a fellowship from the foundation to be part of her own therapy team. She accepted, perhaps a place that had stolen something from the trash and gotten its head under the bus could change that too. 15 years later, I decided to retire as president of the company. The board of directors didn't surround me with this. I appointed another leader, someone younger, more dynamic, but full of compassion. She was a woman. She reminded me of Viviana. After retirement, Victor's nurse manager and I wrote an article for a journal, Compassion Management, Beyond Justice. The journal's editor described it as groundbreaking, counterconformist. Perhaps it was him. Perhaps for people, compassion came easily. They just needed to do it, not just remember it. Old age, like Viviana's, wasn't awful. It had its strength, its pinches, its freedom to spend my own time. I read books from the library. I sat in Viviana's garden. I watched the light fall beneath the sky. One day, in my office, I found an old file from Viviana's personal archive. It contained pictures from the cameras of the first day I returned home, cleaning out the messy room and finding an aging Victoria in bed. Every moment had been recorded, and there was a note in Viviana's handwriting. Today, it read, Eleanor's life changed. She doesn't know it, but I, in heaven, am watching. Because justice is not simply punishment. Justice is healing and transformation. After finishing the letter, I lifted myself up, got up from the table, and went to the window. The city below was full of light, bustling, full of life. My city, my life, my city of justice. A year later, I heard that Victor had retired. He had given up his nursing job and was writing a book, The Power of Error, A Journey from Punishment to Freedom. He sent me the first copy. The dedication page, it read, to Eleanor and Viviana for their mercy upon me. Perhaps this was the most difficult gift, but the most precious. After reading it, I was moved. Perhaps justice wasn't just about Malik and Miss Aloy's rotting in prison. Perhaps justice was about Victor recovering, Margaret helping him, and the city changing. 5 years later, I received news. Margaret had passed away, quietly, peacefully, like sleeping. She was in the hospital, but not alone. Victor sat beside her, holding her hand. In her will, she had left all her money to her foundation. The will stated, because they showed me mercy and seeing such a good end. I hoped that perhaps I too could have been a good person. Hope failed, but money perhaps can help. Victor wrote to me, Eleanor, Margaret finally found herself. She found herself much later, but she found herself. And perhaps we can be justice for someone, but I don't know if we can also be justice for ourselves. But thank you for your reply. The last letter, when I received it, I was very old. 17 years had passed. From Victor, Eleanor, I am dying. The doctor said 6 months. I want to live in that beautiful garden, your garden, the one Viviana introduced me to. I want to spend my last days under your care. I don't know if it's pity or completion, but you have been my faithful companion. Please allow it. Yes, I said. Victor sat in the garden. After 6 months, one winter morning, he passed away while he was asleep. He went away from his suffering, perhaps to be with Viviana. His body was buried next to Viviana's. Epilogue. 30 years later, the company was known as one of the most ethical companies in the world. The Eleanor Hayes Foundation had reached over 1 million people. Compassionate management was taught as a course in all its institutions. Benin and Viviana's The Story was included in school textbooks. I was 90 years old. My hair was white, my face was wrinkled, but my eyes were still sharp and full of light. On the last day, as I sat in the garden drinking my tea, a child came to ask me a question. Mrs. Hayes, he said, why are you such a compassionate person? I closed my eyes and remembered Viviana. Her smile, her voice, her wisdom. Perhaps she was watching over the heavens. Because I said to the child, once upon a time, a woman showed me compassion. Because it's very simple. Compassion is the only difference. But the biggest difference between giving and receiving. If you show compassion to someone, perhaps they will show compassion to someone else in the future. That's how the universe works. The child nodded. I don't know if he understood or not, but it was enough. The sun was setting. The garden was bathed in shades of gold and orange. I watched the light and sat peacefully. Viviana gave me a farm, but I gave her the mark of mercy. And that mark spread throughout the world. Justice is not just punishment. Justice is healing, change, rebirth, and perhaps most importantly, compassion. When the stars came out at night, I closed my eyes and fell asleep. In my dreams, I saw Viviana. She was smiling. Victor was with her. Perhaps Margaret too. They are all at peace. This story is completed not by what is left behind, but by the meanings derived from it. What happened wasn't easy, but every difficulty opens the door to self-discovery. When trust is shaken, life can feel like it's stopped, but time keeps moving forward. In this process, one learns to recognize not only the things one cannot control, but also one's own limitations. What happened is not a sign of weakness. Sometimes even the strongest seeming bonds can carry unseen burdens. The important thing is not to be crushed by these burdens and to be able to take action after seeing the truth. Awareness can be painful, but it is also liberating. This story reminds us of the value of asking questions and staying involved in the process. Taking responsibility for your own life is not about fear, but about empowerment. Every ending opens the way for a new beginning. Sometimes silent, sometimes difficult, but always instructive. And what remains is not loss, but rather a gained awareness.